want to start off by maybe asking, going back to the very start and asking how you kind of came about, how Space Popular began. Was it something that emerged from university, or did you work in practice first and then transition into this? What's your kind of background story?
We both studied at the AA, graduated the same year. However, we didn't start really working together until like about a year. Well, we moved right after graduating. We moved to Bangkok, where we got a teaching job at INDA in Chulalongkorn University. And after about a year and a half of learning how to teach, we then decided to start doing projects together. And then we basically founded the office and started doing competitions together.
Yeah, so we were the office was based in Bangkok for about 5 years, where we did we did interiors and furniture apart from teaching, and basically we were both year coordinators at the school that Lara was just mentioning. So there was a lot of explorations with our interests with the students and a lot of competitions. And then we, after Bangkok, we located back to London, where we've been based now for almost 4 years, where we're again teaching at the AA, at the Architectural Association, and run the office from here. But the work is, projects that we do are all over the world, not necessarily in the UK or even in Europe.
And one of the most striking things, I think, kind of doing research into this, was the sheer variety of work that you do. From architecture to furniture to exhibitions. And you mentioned there when you set up the practice, this seemed to be something which was there from the start. Am I right? Where you had all these multiple explorations. You didn't kind of focus in on one thing. Was that an intentional thing that maybe you thought as starting up that this would give you the biggest breadth of opportunity, or has this always been simply how you evolved as architects, where you were just multidisciplinary from the beginning?
Well, I think coming back again from where usually things starts for a young creative, the Architectural Association kind of helps you set up a very multidisciplinary thinking of the world and what you're capable of. And then, I mean, it's in our logo. If you look closely, it says all things, all places. We kind of were very interested in applying the kind of skills we maybe have and the interests we have to as many areas as possible, both because we really enjoy a wide range of different challenges, everything from scavenging around side streets in Bangkok looking for the perfect material for a chair, to designing an enormous housing project or doing immersive cinema. And we've been just really lucky that apart from projects we've self-initiated, we've had a chance with a wide range of clients and both museums and the private clients to continue to be multidisciplinary and hopefully without losing something along the way, but rather just with each thing we try getting better at it. Yeah.
And how does that translate into your everyday work? So you talked about going from large housing schemes to pieces of furniture. Is this something that would happen all in one day, or do you find it almost a bit of a relief to kind of move away from the large house to the chair and then back to the large house again? Is it how do you balance that?
It happens all in one day. I don't know. I think in the end, it's not so different to be like, especially when you are in the area of detailing and materials and so on. In the end, you end up doing drawings that are very similar. So you start finding that you apply relatively similar principles to one and the other, and maybe it makes you think about the detailing of the structure for a building with the same freedom as you think about the detailing for the structure of a piece of furniture. So I think that is something to keep in mind, that in the end you might be applying the same logic and the same approach to wildly different scales, because the thing that critically changes in between when you move between scale, like sizes of projects, is basically the degree of collaboration with others. and even that, you also learn working at any scale, and that, for example, like learning how to better ways to work with other people, both like in very practical terms, like literally how do we develop methods to work together, to also like how to communicate, how to say things, what to expect from others, and how to dialogue, is something that also is runs across academia and practice, which that was a wonderful learning experience when going into teaching right after graduating, and also quite a bit of coordination that we did in our teaching in Bangkok was really incredible to just learn really how to work with a team of people that are often, most of them, more qualified or with more experience than yourself.
Yeah.
But there's also, I think, interesting to add to that is that the kind of practice that we run, I think, is very, very common in the last 10 to 15 years maybe, but before then I don't think you would really see the kind of office that we run, where our collaborators are based where the projects are, by and large. We range from up to a few people to really the core of the office is just the two directors. And then, we have, when we have projects on site, we're literally, about 2 or 3 hours a day on a various amount of virtual platforms, everything from simple things like chatting or video calls and things like this. And it might not be ideal, but we managed to then have projects on site in different continents simultaneously, thanks to the current, the way that media has evolved, basically. So.
Yeah, I've actually, because virtual reality and virtual ways of thinking is so prevalent in your work, that I want to get onto that in a second. I think, Lara, you mentioned something interesting there about your connection between practice and education and what you learned from education. So how important was that experience of education, and do you think you would have continued on this trajectory had you not had that experience in education? Do you think it would have something totally different? And do you see that connection with education as continuing to be important as you progress, as the practice evolves?
Yeah, it's crucial. Nothing would have been the same if we didn't begin teaching. I never thought that was the first thing I would do right after finishing school, and I feel just so incredibly privileged to have been able to do that, because you quickly, and almost without a choice, like you quickly like adjust to coming from being able to focus on one project for a year, well, that's the format we had, or for a semester or so, to deal with like 12 to 24 projects simultaneously. And that overview and the agility that you develop in like, okay, what is really important for this project? How can we develop a design method, not necessarily resolve it right now, but make sure that I can keep you busy for 4, 6, 12 months, is something that then like you take that in with yourself to practice. And therefore you start thinking of projects. Firstly, like being able to switch between projects quite not seamlessly, but without much of an effort. And also like being able to not get locked into one, and be able to like have those processes in place, also to work as two without having to split projects, means that you need to also really get very good at conversation and how do you express your opinions, which is the same as with teaching. Luckily, we are at a time now, we all know about the past when the professors used to say really mean things to students, and now, of course, thank God, it's not like that at all. And the way you communicate, critique, the way you express an opinion, even the way you form an opinion, you become a lot more careful with that and a lot better at that. So I think without teaching, of course, all of the ideas that we developed, but also the ways of expressing, the ways of dialoguing would not be there. And I think I would find it much harder.
Fredrik, do you have anything to Anything further? It's quite comprehensive, but
yeah, no. I just maybe add that, of course, also both teaching and having studied ourselves in very creative and interesting settings allows you to keep a very broad view on the world, which I think, I mean, this probably applies whenever you happen to live, but you could say that it's maybe more important than ever, which you probably could say in the 60s and the 19th century as well. But both helping students to find their way with ideas that might not necessarily be the most obvious thing to do, both on a very personal and almost selfish level, of course, sharpens your neurons in a way that just nothing else could. But then also every now and then something that you develop, I mean, obviously the things that we develop with students, the student projects, we think are completely and utter relevant, of course, but eventually they do become incredibly relevant. And I mean, now, for instance, with our students at the Architectural Association, in our diploma unit called the Civic Program, we're dealing with questions of civic space in virtual environments, for instance, which is not talked about much, but is something that we definitely foresee that we will really have to deal with in our practice, and as just everyone in the world will have to deal with those questions much more in the next, let's say, 20 to 30 years. But it allows us to really spend time and talking about them and exploring them.
In terms of virtual processes, then, obviously, throughout the course of the last few weeks, architects all over the world have almost overnight been forced to place virtual and digital practices at the core of what they do, because offices have been shut down, people are working remotely. And I'm wondering, how have you, as a practice, have you had to change anything over the last few weeks, or has your attention to virtual and digital technologies allowed you to not have to change much in your everyday work?
I mean, I think a lot has changed for us. A few projects are delayed and things like that. Like for everybody, a bit of a rough time when you are a very nuclear, very small office. So more in terms of planning, things have changed. In terms of working, the situation is that like the core of the office, or like the office itself, remains physically in the same space, right? I think the big changes would be if, or comparable to the changes that other people with bigger offices are having, would be if we ended up in different corners of the world, and that would probably have been a bit of a challenge, because we're very used to working remotely with others. We're not used to working remotely in between the two of us. So in that sense, it's almost unnoticeable, the day-to-day work for us. However, the considerations of the type of work that we might be able to develop now could be quite significant. What we could start doing now, mainly not just because of how things have changed for us, but because of how the view of the possibilities with virtual spaces might change others. And we're of course like rushing to think about like what are the formats or the type of spaces that people might be needing very immediately, because usually we think about the projects we are doing, look at a moment in about 5 to 10 years time with different types of hardware. Basically, most of the projects that we do with regards to the virtual speculate on a near future situation. But this has pushed us to think about the right now, and which solutions can we provide to different people with different needs with their current means. And with that, I mean their types of the type of hardware that they have now.
Yeah, but of course, the one big shift is that the spaces that we usually spend quite a lot of time in is social VR places that have been a part of our exhibition work for the past couple of years. For instance, in our exhibition Value in the Virtual with curator James Taylor Foster at Arctis, there was a headset in the middle of the exhibition where visitors could tune in to a shared virtual environment where we would then join from our studio here. Anyone from the world could join. And those spaces have been more or less occupied in the last, since we've been spending time there the last 3 years or so, but they're now in the last couple of weeks very busy. But so we still meet up with our friends and collaborators from all over the world through our avatars. And of course, every time we go in, literally day by day, they're more and more crowded, and there's more and more people, more and more newcomers, which is also very interesting because literally you're meeting someone wearing their avatar for the first time, and you get the chance to kind of invite people to this. Despite this situation, we don't think that this necessarily, of course, just something that's going to happen now and then disappear or be there just because we may not be able to travel in the future as much as we can, but because the intrinsic quality in those spaces themselves.
Mm-hmm.
So of course we are, where we are always, we're completely kitted out with the hardware so that we can join any virtual meeting with a conference that's going on actually just these days, where we're joining through our headsets.
It has been fascinating over the last few days, watching how ideas, even beyond architecture, ideas that used to be considered fringe ideas like universal basic income, have almost overnight become government policies, even in the UK or the US. And architecture and real estate and construction have often been accused of being slow to adapt to change or slow to evolve. Do you think that the kind of shock factor that we've got now, where architects and designers have almost been forced to embrace these new virtual technologies, do you think that will last beyond this outbreak? Do you think things will go back to normal, or how do you see the future of these virtual systems kind of unfolding in the industry in the future?
No, go ahead.
We have been talking about like before all of this unraveled. We were talking about the fact that the way in which the virtual spaces were going to become mainstream was going to be once they were adopted through work. So in the work environment, I think most people is trying out mostly just like still working with 2D interfaces, but some people is venturing into 3-dimensional virtual worlds, and depending on the duration of this, it might be more and more, and people will get more and more curious. So despite the fact that it might begin as something remedial to a tragic situation, I think once it is adopted and explored, and people get accustomed to it through work, then it will quickly seep into all areas of life very seamlessly and without us noticing, like it happened with the computer, the personal computer and the phone, etc. So then that is about like society at large adopting that new technology and realizing what it is good for, and also realizing that it does not replace anything. It just adds a new layer on top. And maybe it replaces some very unnecessary things, but it does not replace our physical interactions at all. And then it will be about whether both the general public and the architectural discipline identifies those spaces as spaces that need to be designed by architects. And I think that cannot be done if architects are not pushing for it, because of course there is a whole world of architects have had their say in set design, in a little bit in game design, but in mostly in any discipline that has to do with computing. You mention architect and nobody's thinking of an architect like this. They are thinking of the other type of architect, is a systems
architect, yeah.
Systems architect. So I think whoever is interested can jump on board as soon as possible And if there is enough architects, then there will be a very interesting discussion around it. And then also like society would recognize that like the importance of design within those spaces. Because what is really interesting as well is that in a place where there is no need for shelter, everything you are providing is experience. And that's when it comes to question, like as an architect, are we being trained in such a way, besides the technical aspect of things, are we really trained to think through the way spaces have a purpose beyond shelter?
And it's important also to realize that this current situation should just maybe be mentioned that it's the 23rd of March 2020, just for context, that it might help but it might propel the need for being together on distance. But I mean, the situation we find ourselves now technologically is so extreme in how fast it's gone, and it has not been propelled by necessarily any direct emergency. It's been propelled by our very, very deep desire need to be as close to each other as we can.
Yeah.
So like, you look at, growing up with the most advanced piece of technology in the home was the VCR and the telephone. Within our short lifetime, seeing where we are now, it's driven by other things, not necessarily by any kind of emergency state. So this will change things, but the kind of core of what's driving it is definitely just our deep desire to be as close to each other as possible.
Mm-hmm. And has it caused you to stand back and look at your own practice and the importance of your own practice in a new light? Because when you look at organizations like the MIT Sensible City Lab, they are very strong on this idea of using virtual environments and digital environments to kind of propagate new scenarios that might be adopted by the public. And they're one of very few institutions or organizations that do that. But looking at your work, you are another practice which seems nimble enough to very quickly imagine and through your prior knowledge of virtual systems to enact ideas about digital technology and virtual technology. So you seem to be, to a certain extent, early adopters of the idea of virtual realities and of digital realities in architecture. So has it caused you to rethink your own importance or your own role as a practice going forward?
I think it's more just shifted the consideration of when it would happen, really, because definitely we work with these subjects because they just fascinates us to our core, being interested in experience and in the possibility of what space in whichever reality it happens to be in, the possibility it has to gather people. But of course, like our first exhibitions and our first speculative projects dealing with this, we were talking about a 20 to 30 year timeline of what we as architects, city planners, and just general public might have to prepare ourselves for good or worse. So it, of course, changes it in a bit just in general of just our kind of timeline of when we have been thinking about when we would be able to do the projects that we would really, really like to do, that we were thinking like, if we can remain being productive and having fun exploring these topics for the next 20 to 30 years, then we might have a chance to be involved in the creation of something really, really, really kind of fundamental.
Yeah.
And that might happen sooner than we think.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, obviously these things are so immensely complex, and there's so many. It's literally like if you ask someone, Buñuel or someone involved in the kind of beginning of the Industrial Revolution, it's like, are you thinking about the next 100 years? So what's this going to do to everything? And obviously, no one is even close to being concerned with all the details. But we're really excited to see it evolve, be it faster or slower.
And what do you think it will change the relationship between you kind of touched on this before, the relationship between architects and the wider public? Do you think these new channels will allow us to make architecture more accessible to the public? Do you think that moving to a more virtual and digital-led approach to design might create feedback loops between architects and the public? Or do you think there's more opportunities will now emerge for greater collaboration and to bring new people into this, to the act of design, the act of architecture, that normally would have been shut out and excluded from it?
Yeah, I mean, I think just because it will happen at a faster pace, no? Architecture will happen at a faster pace. I don't think that everyone is always within the discipline of architecture so concerned about not being understood and like there being all these conflicts. But I mean, when you look at it, it's like often you're designing someone's home to live in, the greatest investment of their lives, and most of it is maybe relatively successful, I think. So I think actually that conversation for how complex the issues you're dealing with and how personal it needs to get, I think it's often actually quite successful, despite all of the how it is often complained about, or
how we write it often.
But I think what the issue is that usually with architecture, most people that is involved with it only gets a shot at it, or is a developer, and then they treat it in a completely different way. But now with virtual spaces and potentially doing that in collaboration with architects and so on, it will people will have so much more access to samples and to seeing like what is and to maybe samples of places that they develop for themselves, for different areas of their work or of their personal lives. And so that communication will get better because we will have more instances, more situations to work with, right? So I think there will be a better understanding because of that. I think also the collaboration would now, architects often complain about the people choosing the wrong curtains and things like that. This will, of course, like inflate to unimaginable levels. So I think that attachment or like understanding your role and what you are delivering will, there will be a myriad of new possibilities for what the role of an architect would be, from like, I think that probably the most relevant would be help with organization, also with rethinking flow, how you move around spaces, sequence of spaces, and basically like experience design at the core of like, how do you arrive to a place? How do you then come to another room? How are rooms connected? Reinvent the door. I mean, it's, the questions are really exciting and many, and I think that will lead to the range of involvement and the level of the areas of design for an architect being quite wide. I mean, I think they're already really wide. There's many different types of architects. I think this will just like multiply it by a few times.
But of course, this situation and evolving situations like this, of course, on a physical level, of course, can create the sort of escalation of the sort of gated community type of approach to physical architecture. And there's obviously so many layers to this, but if we do focus on the potential promise of what virtual or semi-virtual architecture might be, I mean, the spaces that we spend our time in now, that we have been spending our time in these social VR places and other places like that, none of them are built by architects, and that's maybe a good thing. They're largely they're built by the people that develop the tools to make them themselves, but also people of all ages and of all sort of disciplines, and certainly the kind of tools that you need to acquire in order to put physical things together to make buildings versus learning how to put virtual spaces together are very different, and the kind of learning curve is obviously a lot lower when it's creating virtual architecture, and definitely it will see some kind of process of deeper involvement of the general public in the thinking of space. If you just listen to a young person who's interested in CGI talking about refractions and different kinds of glass and different types of lights, and just deep understanding of how deep spaces are and how to put things together in ways that your average teenager maybe wouldn't be able to do before these tools were available not so long ago.
I want to then bring this back to your broader work, because as we kind of talked about at the start, you work across so many disciplines: architecture, exhibitions, interior design, virtual realities, academia. Is there any one mode in which you feel most at home and most confident in, or does your kind of underlying philosophy and underlying approach to your work translate equally well across all the different disciplines, regardless of scale or purpose or digital or physical or whatever?
That's.
I would never think they are different disciplines, though.
I mean, conventionally they are seen as being different disciplines. But,
yeah, but the specialization here that we're aiming towards is experience driven, right? Experience design, and that just means that it's human centric, or like it's all around how does it work for you as a human. I mean, that I guess is not even fair to say, because like all architects are concerned with that, and all furniture designers are concerned with that, right? So when you take in that principle, then they don't become so different from one another. Then I guess you get good at certain things and not others. I don't know, it's probably like particular types of buildings with programs that are complex at a level that it would require a type of a specialization that maybe we couldn't have. And then also like, I don't know, particular things in other areas like furniture design, which we maybe could not get to. But I think so far for now, all the projects seem to be coherent within that. Like basically, how do you design any kind of thing, any kind, be it an enclosure or a thing within the enclosure that you sit on, or right? And how do you design that around a particular intention that can come simply from us, or from us and from a brief that we're given, or from us from a brief and from a really important context that we need to respond to? And then just like, how do you juggle all those things together in the best possible way?
But it's obviously, there's arguments for and against specialization versus diversity in one's approach to a series of projects or issues. And I definitely think that we're not the only ones who are kind of taking advantage of the kind of media landscape that we find ourselves in, where we have the capacity to gain vast amounts of knowledge of basically anything. And I think our kind of philosophy, let's say, that I think we share with many, is that whatever the problem or whatever the situation or the challenge might be, the more you know about other things, the better you'll be at solving that, or kind of getting somewhere with that particular issue. And we have now the capacity to learn about such vastly different things at our fingertips, that it basically just seems, in a kind of Marshall McLuhan sense, just that's what the responsibility we have. We have the ability to specialize and become really incredibly good at a specific thing, but which might add a lot of public benefit. But the fact that we can learn about so many different things, because that's, I think, what all of our work has in common, is that it's also at its core an excuse to learn something about a specific thing, and that's really maybe what they all have in common, is just a great urge to kind of learn as much as possible about an interesting, complex situation. And the more we learn about one thing, that might be about a housing project, is definitely going to be a small part about creating an immersive piece of cinema, for instance.
Yeah. And then to kind of wrap up then, so you have coming up an exhibition at the RIBA in London, which we're going to talk to you at a later date about. Is there anything else kind of interesting that you're working on that you can share with us, or an overview of what interests or what's occupying your time at the moment? I know it's probably all been upended in the last few days, but
no, but we were lucky enough to finish a few things that are not finished. One thing that hasn't been published yet, which probably will be out soon, which is the design for another spa in Bangkok, Thailand. So with a whole new furniture collection, and then everything customized again. So we're very excited to be able to share that soon.
Cool.
And then also we're working on a very exciting project that it's almost ready and just got delayed, and hopefully will not get delayed anymore. But with the company Finsa, which is a company a Spanish company that makes wood and different types of wood products, and we designed a whole quite monumental display for their new range of products, which will be shown at the Design Museum now in late June. So that we are really excited about, and that will be shown in London at the Design Museum only for one day. So whoever wants to see that should keep an eye out.
But more generally, of course, we in the kind of string of exhibitions and speculative projects we've been lucky to develop, we obviously have our minds on the kind of ambition and what we will be able to do in the next 5 to 10 years, as we see probably at least within the next 5 years, the projects that we'll hopefully will be able to do will remain more or less in the world of speculation, where we engage the public as we have done in exhibitions in the past, but in a more ambitious way, in what a semi or fully virtual experience might be like, and what it could mean for the human experience and the potential of being together in virtual space. So probably in the next couple of years, we'll see larger, more ambitious, and more connected projects in bigger and bigger spaces. And then hopefully within the next 10 years, as we said in the beginning, we'll be able to kind of really kind of get our hands on actually playing a kind of more substantial role in how these things actually might be rolled out to the general public. Yeah.